When someone walks through the door at the Collective for Hope, one of the first things we take them to is our honor beads display, where they can wear the different colors of beads that represent their different types of losses. For example, my son and I went through family group, and he was wearing his purple beads for Granny when my mom passed away. And when he walked into his room, he saw another kid wearing purple beads. So it was that immediate visual indication that I'm sharing in your grief, the same type of grief. And on the car ride home, he told me, hey, I made a new friend, they were wearing purple beads.
Hello and welcome to Mindshift, a PLCS Empowerment Collective podcast. My name is Christopher and I am one of your hosts today.
And I'm Deb, I'm your co-host. Welcome everyone.
And Deb, today we are talking about grief and also hope. Grief and hope today we're talking about. And one of the things that I learned from the Collective for Hope, which is based out of Nebraska, that in Nebraska and Iowa, 1 in 15 kids will lose a parent or sibling by the age of 18. And I bring that up because I know for my son, it's not a parent or sibling, but he lost his cousin and uncle when he was very young. And so I found this book, a children's book called Bird is Dead. And that's it. It's a very subtle title. Bird is Dead. What the book is about is this group of birds suddenly finds one of their other birds dead, and they talk through how they're feeling and what that means, and then what do you do, and the process of that. And I started reading that book to him, among some other books as well about it. And it's amazing to me, his capacity now to talk about his grief and hope, especially in terms of losing a loved one.
So here's what I want to say about this. I feel like I have to give a little bit of background for even me. I grew up in a funeral home family. My dad owned a funeral home. My brother ran the funeral home. And so I grew up very comfortable being around death, being around dead people. And so I have a comfort level with death and dying and grief, probably that is not typical. And I heard our guest say, when you said bird is dead, that it was the right word. So I want to hear more about that. So why don't we have our guest introduce himself?
My name is Cliff. I'm a very grateful recipient of grief support through the Collective for Hope. I have the pleasure of being on our team, which is Omaha's only nonprofit solely dedicated to free and inclusive grief support. So we do that a number of ways. And I would be remiss if I didn't say, there is joy in the work that we do. Part of my grief's journey is losing both of my parents, particularly my father in my 20s. I can't watch Field of Dreams without crying and remembering my dad. But I also, very often on Sundays, remember this time he farted too loud in church, and I told that story once and someone was like, oh, it's not just that he farted, it's that he farted loud enough that other people could hear it this time. And I was like, yeah, you're right. But it's complicated. There's a duality to grief and loss. And that's one of the things that we understand here at the Collective for Hope. And that's why we have so many support groups and so many ways of supporting anyone from 3 years old and up.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about some of the things that happen in the support groups, especially for children.
Yeah. So one thing that we should talk about when it comes to grief is there are no stages, or if there are, they aren't linear. Everyone's grief is unique, and it's something that we can share together. The only thing we don't currently provide at the Collective for Hope is infant care, which is why our groups start at 3 and up. But our flagship program is our family group, and that's where families come together in community. We start in a community conversation, and then we break off into age-appropriate or developmentally appropriate classrooms. And so each family group is a cohort, and it's unique, just like their grief. But sometimes we have 4, 5, 6-year-olds in a group, 7, 8, 9-year-olds. Adults are with adults, but it allows us to provide that age group, the play therapy, or the particular support that child needs in that age group. So especially with our littles, everyone here at the Collective, we've all been impacted by all the different types of grief that we now support in our community through different groups. We're all grief facilitator trained. So I myself have facilitated, elementary classrooms, preteen, teens. That was a scary one, but it was a great one. But, with the littlest of kids, we do a lot of outdoor play therapy, arts and crafts. With some older kids, we get into more of the language, or we write regrets on plates and go outside and break them on the ground. We do that type of activity. And we have our own curriculum that we developed over the years, and we have volunteers that are trained in our facilitation model.
All three of us have said the word multiple times now, grief. Can you help us out? What is grief? How would you define grief, and what does it look like, or what could it look like?
I mean, I would say grief is one of the more normal processes you can go through as a human being. It's universal, but while we all experience it, we can support each other with that shared experience, because while it is normal, it's oftentimes something that we avoid dealing with or avoid talking about. And so that's what we do at the collective is, we can give you some words, we can give you some coping skills, but we can also just be a person walking alongside you on your grief journey.
And does grief have to come from the loss of a loved one or family member, or can you experience grief that is rooted in other places as well?
Yeah, so at the collective, we do kind of hyper focus on bereavement, because that is exactly what we can support you through with our groups. But we have so many conversations with our community about bigger concepts of grief. If you have a parent or person that is incarcerated, if you're a refugee and you've lost that sense of identity with the country that you came from, there are different types of grief. So you're right. We do recognize other types of loss. The other thing I wanted to say, the 1 in 15 statistic, it's also 1 in 5 if you go up to age 25. And if you go into adults, 1 in 4 pregnancies end in loss, and 1 in 4 adults in general are experiencing loss at any given time. So another support group we have is our pregnancy and infant loss support group.
And that's where the teddy bears come in. Is that right?
Yeah. I don't know if everyone can see. So this is Hope. Hope has a little heart tag with their name on it. This is a weighted bear for pregnancy and infant loss. And so we have volunteers that come and make these bears, and they can weight them, the weight at the time of death. And we've sent these bears to 50 states.
So they're the same weight as what the baby was.
They're the same weight. And we have moms who come back to us and say, my 15-pound Georgie bear was in every family photo since we lost him. And they say their names out loud, and they continue to speak of their person, often. These are actually our honor beads. So our honor beads are beads. When someone walks through the door at the Collective for Hope, one of the first things we take them to is our honor beads display, where they can wear the different colors of beads that represent their different types of losses. So, for example, my son and I went through family group, and he was wearing his purple beads for Granny when my mom passed away. And when he walked into his room, he saw another kid wearing purple beads. So it was that immediate visual indication that I'm sharing in your grief, the same type of grief. And on the car ride home, he told me, "Hey, I made a new friend. They were wearing purple beads." These beads actually, these represent my losses. So a couple of different colors there. At the Collective, one of the things we always like to do is provide people an opportunity to say their people's names. So some of my losses to me represent, friends, colleagues in the military, parents and pets. So if you would indulge me and allow me to say some of my people's names real quick. So some of my names are Mark, Lori, Bart, Jackie, and Yoda. So my dad's name was not Yoda, Christopher. Well, I've had a few pets over the years, but Yoda was by far my favorite pet growing up. So, and it was a cat, if we need to get into the cat and dog debate.
It's a powerful experience to be able to do that and to be able to feel confident in doing that as well. If we have parents that are listening where their kids have experienced grief, and maybe they're not ready for the level of support that you can provide at the Collective for Hope, but they want to start with some conversations at home. Do you have any suggestions for what that could look like?
So first of all, when anyone in grief even picks up the phone to give us a call, we consider that an act of courage. Because while you are in grief, even just taking that step to punch those numbers into a phone and call someone and say, "Hey, what's available?" We understand that, we acknowledge it. And even if it's just a conversation in the moment or an email with some grief resources, we can do that for you. One of the things that honestly currently concerns us is that if you do give us a call, our next group might not be for a week or two, or if it's a family group, it might not be for a month or two. But I would also be remiss if I didn't mention right now, we are building a grief center in Omaha. It's going to be double the space and hopefully triple the programming.
I do think people get afraid, whether they're parents or teachers, about how to talk to kids about death without scaring them.
Yeah.
So do you have tips for that? Because I know you say to use the right language, Cliff, but saying the word
Yeah.
dead can be scary for people. So what would you recommend?
I'm a Mr. Rogers fan. Mr. Rogers was always great at just being honest. And he often said one of the greatest gifts you can give anybody is the gift of your authentic self. You know, he was always reassuring and wasn't afraid to talk about feelings. And maybe it's just talk about feelings. But I think talking about death in daily conversations, whether it's a video game and I'm telling my son, you know, hey, that's not real death, right? Or whether it's talking about your person. You know, my mom passed away and my son knew Granny. You know, my son knew that most Sunday afternoons we took McDonald's to Granny's condo. And so when my mom passed away, Corbin came to the funeral. And in my speech about my mom, you know, I told a story about, you know, when you're a kid and you're kind of embarrassed to tell your parents that I love you in public, like when they're dropping you off at school. But I would always say, I would always do the Star Trek sign because my mom and I watch Star Trek every Saturday evening. And the Star Trek sign for live long and prosper was okay, but saying I love you out loud wasn't for me. I told that story at the funeral. And, you know, a couple weeks later, my son just out of nowhere asked me, hey, can we watch Star Trek? Can you show me how to do the Star Trek sign? And we didn't talk about my mom for a year. And we didn't talk about my mom until we went to family group. And we went to family group. We talked to new friends. We made new friends. We came back in community. And then we got in my car. And on the way home, he asked me questions about Granny. And we did that for 8 weeks. And I told him stories about his Granny that he never knew. And I mean, so I'm forever indebted to the Collective for Hope because my mom is a part of our lives again because we talk about her. And not only that, my kids never knew my dad. So now I talk about my dad. I tell them stories and I say their name. So that's one suggestion. I know it's anecdotal and it's personal, but you know, I mention my mom and dad more often now than I did prior to the Collective for Hope. So,
You know, one of the things that struck me, Cliff, is when my dad died, and I'm not from Nebraska, so he died in North Dakota, where I'm from, and nobody knew him here. And the first time I heard somebody here and that knew my dad say his name
yeah.
just made such an impact on me just to hear, oh my gosh, somebody knows my dad and is saying his name out loud. So I know you've said that several times. I just want to put kind of a highlight on that.
Yeah.
It is so important to be able to hear and say your person's name.
I do it on a daily basis now because we often will just say my mom or in conversation, or if it doesn't come up in conversation, if it does come up, you're like, oh, I lost my mom or my dad. And then I'll jump right in. I don't even wait anymore. What's your dad's name? Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing. Because there's power in words. And there's power in people's names. And speaking of words, another thing we do a lot is maybe we don't say loved one. Maybe we just say your person because everyone's grief is relational. And maybe the person you lost was not a good person. Was complicated. Yes. But they're a person and you're grieving them.
One question that I was thinking about as you were talking, and then I'll get to the wrap-up question here in a second. Do you have any suggestions for maybe preempting some of those experiences with conversations or learning at home around death and dying or around grief?
I think you touched on it when you mentioned the book that you found. We have a lending library at the Collective for Hope, which touch on a lot of these topics. But I would also say, you know, even if you don't have a recent loss, we all come from a long line of dead people. That was supposed to be a joke. It got a laugh at our conference.
It's true.
No, but talk about your family. Talk about your history. If you're watching a movie, be emotional. Model healthy grieving. Don't be afraid to be vulnerable. Don't be afraid to cry at a drama or share your thoughts with your kids or let your kids share their thoughts with you.
And now to kind of wrap things up as we get to the end of our time together, thinking about our conversation on grief, we always like to end with hope, which is appropriate in this case with the Collective for Hope. So what gives you hope about children's natural resilience in the face of loss?
I think what gives me the most hope is the community that naturally rises when we do this work. You know, I personally think we become more resilient and compassionate as a community when we recognize and acknowledge and validate stuff like grief. But it's such a normal thing that we will all process. And you shouldn't be afraid of processing grief. I think we get in trouble if we try not to process something that is so normal and universal. Another part of the work that we do at the collective is trying to cultivate that grief affirming community, because we do believe that you can live in a world where grief is not just normalized, but it's valued. It's valued as something that we honor together as a unifying experience. And so we believe in honoring the grief together and honoring the people.
Cliff, thank you so much for sharing with us not only your expertise in your work, but also your personal experiences with grief. And thank you at home for listening to Mindshift. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts, and you can visit us online at plcschools.org/Mindshift for more content from this episode and all of our other episodes. And be sure to join us next week when we'll be discussing another exciting topic.